Okay, so this is Unit 6, questions part 2. And I haven't told you, and you may not even care. But this unit connects so much stuff. Like, this is about the 1920s, and so many things come together here. For example, people over here laughing, but they're going to benefit from having this thing if they watch. So, question number one says, "Who was Herbert Hoover?" Let me back this thing up for a second. So, president of the first president of the 1900s was Theodore Roosevelt. We've talked about him. Done. Second president of the 1900s was a guy named William Howard Taft. He's the guy that got stuck in the bathtub. The third president of the 1900s is Woodrow Wilson. He's the president during World War One. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, or in the last whatever this thing is, um, the first three presidents were considered progressive presidents, which they want to make things better and better and better and better. And just like Isaac Newton said, all things, whatever goes up, must come down, and every action has an equal opposite reaction kind of business. Well, after three solid presidents of trying to make things better, some people are just tired of people trying to make things better and they just want to be left alone. So, after those three progressive presidents, we're going to have three presidents that are the exact opposite of progress. You can even say they're regress, if that's a real word. It is, but that's another conversation. So you've got three presidents after those first three presidents that don't want to do anything. They believe very, very strongly that the best kind of government you can have is the least government. And if you follow that philosophy, completely your business. And you might like these guys. And it also doesn't just apply to social issues; it also applies to economic issues. You may or may not remember the term laissez-faire. Laissez-faire economics means that the government should never get involved in economics. Well, the presidents of the 1920s, all three of them, believed that very same thing. So, president number one of the 1920s, right after Woodrow Wilson, was probably the most like not get involved guy at all. And his name is Warren G. Harding. And the G stands for Gamaliel. His mother must have hated him. Now, Warren G. Harding died after 3 years in office, leaving the presidency to his vice president, who ran for the presidency in his own right just after Mr. Harding. And that guy's name was Calvin Coolidge. And Calvin Coolidge even had an old saying it's like he believed that the business of America is business, and the less that America or the government gets involved in the economic forum, the better off we're all going to be. Now, he's a big believer in laissez-faire economics, and so is Herbert Hoover, which is kind of bad because Herbert Hoover becomes president in 1928. He's all just like the other two guys from the same party, same administration. He believes the same thing that Harding and Coolidge believe in. And Herbert Hoover comes in, and things really don't add up very well for Mr. Hoover because I'll stop there. Now I'll go back to the late 19 or late 1800s. And if you remember, people were having in the late 1800s in the Midwest, they were having these big, big, big cattle farms, big bonanza farms with the cowboys and the barbed wire and so forth. And I know we had this conversation in class that the problem with these big bonanza farms is that these farmers only grew the things that they could grow. So they grew the same crop year after year after year after year. Calvin, I'm calling you out on the video. Hey, what happens if you grow the same crop on the same land over and over and over and over? What happens to the quality of the crop? What happens to the quality of the crop? It's less fertile. Well done. And so if you just keep doing that over and over and over, the soil will eventually give out. I'm recording right now, Calvin. Your name is on the video. But now you're on the video too. So by the 1920s, they've been farming the same crop on the same land for like 40 years. And by the 1920s, that land's going to give out, especially in the Midwest. And they got to where they can't even farm it anymore. So number one says who was Herbert Hoover? He was the third president of the 1920s. He's a big believer in laissez-faire government, laissez-faire economics at a really, really, really bad time. Because number two, what problems did the agricultural community face in the 1920s? Well, one of the big problems is that the land dried out in the Midwest, causing the Dust Bowl. That's bad. And if you have a president that does not believe that the government should get involved, this is a bad time to believe that. Also, another problem is that in the 1910s and early 1920s, so much work on a farm, human labor, has been replaced with machine labor, meaning that the farms are getting bigger and bigger because the equipment can handle more and more. And the bigger the farms get, the small farmers can't actually, farm. So the bigger the farm, the more crop. The more crop, the more supply. The more supply, the less demand. And so that means is the more crops being produced, the less the costs, the less the money they're going to make because the demand is not nearly as high. And if you're a small time farmer and you grow corn and the price of corn has gone down, that means you're making less money on your corn than you did before. And if you're a really, really rich farmer, you could absorb those losses. But small farmers cannot. And a lot of small farmers go out of business. So that's problem number two. You've got the Dust Bowl and you've got decreasing prices. And that's not good. Again, considering that farms, well, I don't know, they're the things that provide you stuff to eat. Okay, so that was really up to just like number two. And so now we're going to go and look at number three. Number three asks, what happened on Black Tuesday? Well, when everything sort of combines in this really, really, it's just a really bad combination. Like, you're having agricultural prices go down, which means the farmers can't make money. The farmers can't make money. They can't pay their bills. They can't pay their bills, including their mortgage. And the banks say that you need to pay your loans. They're like, we can't repay the loans. And the banks will get their money. And the banks' investments, they start to lose their investments. And so the banks go under. And when the banks go under, that means everyone that has their accounts at that time in those banks begin to lose their accounts. They lose money. If they lose money, they can't pay their bills. That's real, real bad. That added to the fact that some banks were letting people buy stocks with loans, and people were just spending money and not really caring about where it goes. And there's people are getting loans without any credit, and they can't. That's bad. So what happened on Black Tuesday? Oh, and then you have presidents like Harding and Coolidge and Hoover who believe in laissez-faire economics, which I know things are getting bad, but it's not the government's job to get involved. Well, whose job is it? Well, in this case, what happened was what they call Black Tuesday, and that's when the stock market completely collapsed. Well, not completely, but mostly. And it really wasn't as bad at first. What happened? Okay, long story short, in the stock market, when people start panicking and they decide to sell off their assets because sell off their stuff to get money, it's because they're afraid they're not going to have any. And so stocks are one of the more expendable commodities. In other words, you don't have to own stocks. People that have the stocks because they had some extra change in their pocket. And so when people feel like they're going to start losing money and the banks are going to lose money, and then you start to get afraid about the money, then people say, hey, I might need some money. And they start selling things they don't need, like stocks. And so on Black Tuesday, it was a panic sell off. Everybody started selling stocks, or they tried to anyway. And so the stock market collapsed. And like if I'm trying to sell something for say $400, but everybody's trying to sell something for $400, I can't sell mine because they're selling theirs. And so I've got to decrease my price on that same item. And then when they see they can't sell theirs, they have to decrease their price on that same item. And so prices of stocks go down, 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 which means the value of those companies goes down. Basically, in a long, short story, what happened on Black Tuesday, the stock market collapsed because everybody's trying to sell stocks because they're terrified that the money's going to be gone. Okay, so number four, what was happening to unemployment in the early 1930s? Well, see, it doesn't just apply to individuals that are afraid of losing money. We also have companies that are afraid of losing money. And when companies and company leaders start to see that we may not have a lot of cash either, things are starting to get bad, they start to look for positions, people's jobs to cut. And a lot of people's jobs got cut. A lot of people's jobs got cut. And so with that's going to cause mass unemployment. And when you have mass unemployment, now you got all these people that don't have a job and they've got bills to pay, which means that just makes things even worse because banks aren't getting paid back their loans because everyone's getting unemployed. And you can't just go find another job because everybody's laying off people. So what's happening with unemployment? It's going, how bad was it? Number five, when you can't afford a loan for the house you bought, you go and buy a house, you take out, most people go and take out loans for houses. Those things are called mortgages. And when people lose their jobs, it's typically your mortgage that costs the most money. And when people lose their jobs, that means people begin to lose their homes because they can't pay their bills because they don't have any income. And so, especially in the cities, and when people begin to lose their jobs, this is how bad it got. So many people began to lose their jobs and they lost their homes, which means they're homeless, and they begin to like dig in trash barrels and trash bins to try to find some scrap metal to make a house out of on a city park. And it's not like four or five people, it's hundreds and thousands of people. So many that entire cities are getting built out of trash outside of the city limits. And those trash cities with trash houses, literal trash houses, were called Hoovervilles. And why they call Hoovervilles? Hoover is the president. Who do you think is getting the blame? Presidents always get the blame or the praise. That's just part of the job. And so Herbert Hoover is going to get blamed for this whole mess. It's not all his fault. It's a lot of people's faults. So, number six, what are tenant farmers? Well, some people that lost their farms, lost their properties, also lost their farms, but they still know how to farm. And so, people that used to have their own farms began to look around for people that would hire them to be farmers, like not of their own property, but on someone else's property. They they begin to live on other people's property to farm and get paid basically nothing, but it's better than not having anything at all. Now, I mentioned to you the Dust Bowl earlier. What states were directly affected by the Dust Bowl? The ones in the Midwest. In particular, Kansas, Nebraska. Uh, probably one of the biggest ones that was hit was Oklahoma. Oklahoma was hit pretty hard, as was a little bit of Arkansas, some of Texas, but Oklahoma was especially hard hit. And when Oklahoma, which is mostly a farming state at the time, still sort of is, When Oklahoma was hit that bad, that means they have a whole bunch of farmers that have lost their property because of the Dust Bowl. A lot of those farmers would go out trying to look for places to work, other agricultural outlets. And so it takes number 8, who were the Okies, farmers, people that used to have their own farms that just go out west looking for jobs. Yeah. Because of the Dust Bowl took away their farm. How many people migrated out of the Great Plains? I mean, I don't have that number, but I can tell you thousands, thousands and thousands and thousands. It was bad. Why do you think that the farmers headed to the cities? That's where the jobs are. What happened to birth rates in the 1930s? What do you think is going to happen to birth rates in the 1930s? If I'm not so certain that I'm going to be able to support a family anymore, I'm not going to try to have a family. So, what happened to birth rates? They go down naturally. Why? You can't afford them. You can't afford to feed them. You can't afford to feed yourself in some cases. Now, number 12, what happened to Mexican Americans? So people that lived in like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, they're going to be pretty hard hit as well. They'll be pretty hard hit as well. They're going to have to migrate themselves, just like the Okies, to other parts of the country, California, to try to seek agricultural labor because when the farms are lost, you've got to, I mean, you've got to have farmers, but you can't have so many farms. So they're going to migrate like the Okies to try to find farm labor. Um, and so there's a lot of competition with Mexican Americans that have moved to the United States, maybe them or their parents or grandparents. A lot of competition between all these groups trying to find work. So, what happens to them? Some of them are going to try to seek their fortunes in other countries. Like some people are going to say, forget America, they go up to Canada. Some are going to go to the cities, like the Okies. Some are going to go to Mexico, only to find out that the Great Depression is hitting everybody. It's not just America. The Great Depression was global. So, what was Hoover's plan of localism? So when Hoover decides that maybe he should get involved, what you think? When Hoover decides he probably should get involved, he had this idea that somebody needs to get involved, but the federal government should not get involved. What should happen is that the federal government, he's the president of, should help states and towns and communities fix the problems in their own local communities. Um, which okay, I get that. Solve a big problem by a little step at a time, but that what Mr. Hoover seems to fail to understand, or failed at the time to understand, is by 1930s the economy is not what it used to be. Used to be you could do localism. Used to be that you could just focus on one community at a time. But by the 1930s, we're all connected, and so if President Hoover decides to give a little bit of cash to the town of Benson to help them recover from the Great Depression, well, Benson may have been all by itself at one point, but is connected to Four Oaks and Smithfield, and and Hoover would say things like, "Hey, businesses, look, the best way to get out of this is just don't lay off people. Businesses, keep employing people. Don't fire them. Workers, don't stop working. Just keep working, even if it means lower pay." And that's Hoover's plan of localism. Don't let the federal government get involved. Let the people of the states and the towns and the businesses, let them fix it. And little by little, we'll get out of it. Mm, didn't really work. So, anyway, Hoover's plan of localism, his idea to defeat the Great Depression, which came because of the stock market crash, was to try to help out. No, let the communities try to solve the problems. And if they solve the problems little bit by little bit, then the whole thing gets solved. Didn't work. What did the Reconstruction Finance Corps try to achieve? This is an example of that. Give some federal dollars, grants, maybe loan out some money to towns and cities to do stuff, to hire people at the local level. Um, Say here, you should probably here's some money from the federal government, North Carolina. Why don't you go and hire some people to go build a bridge or something? And that was the idea of the Reconstruction Finance Corps, to help people to build stuff, not the federal government doing so, but every little state doing their own little piece. Here's some cash, North Carolina. Here's some South Carolina. Y'all go do some stuff. Like, again, it sounds nice, but it clearly didn't work. So why did some people go to number 15? Why did some people blame Hoover for the state of the nation? Well, part of it is because he's the president. And no matter what happens, if something good happens in America, so many people are like so quick to say, well, the president did a good job on that one. If something bad happens in America, is people really quick to blame the president. But y'all, people that do so way overestimate the power of a president. There's so much they have no control over. But just being in that position of president means that all eyes are on you. Sort of like what Tupac said. But all eyes on you, and good and bad. And so one of the reasons why he's blamed is because he's the president and he's one person. And it's far easier to blame one person than 535 congressmen. That's one reason. Another reason why he's blamed is because a lot of people think that he doesn't take enough initiative in trying to fix it, and that is an arguable point as well. So answer number 15, one, because he's the president, two, because maybe he could have done more. Oh well. Who were the bonus army? Okay, so we're going to have to reach back to World War One again because World War One ended in 1919. This is just 10 to 11 years later. That's how soon this was. And before they decided to draft people to go fight in World War One, they tried to sweeten the deal. So, in other words, Woodrow Wilson, president during World War One, says, "Hey, y'all, come and fight against the Germans. Come and protect democracy." And then over in Europe, and a lot of young men were like, "Nah, we're good." And then he was like, okay, I tell you what, how about this? How about if you come and serve your country, right, in the army? Then whenever you need money, whenever it's time for you to retire, we can pay you later an extra bonus for having volunteered, well, to join the army to fight against the Germans and against barbarianism, from what Mr. Wilson said. And for a lot of people, that did it. So let me think. I get paid now, and it's a guaranteed check for when I retire, a bonus amount, a bonus cash amount, because I served my country in war. You know what? I'll take that. A lot of people did. The idea is that when you retire is whenever you're not working. When you're not working, you're not getting paid. And so when you're not getting paid, it would really help to have that bonus check when you get older, in the time that you probably most need it. Well, here's the Great Depression. And a lot of World War One veterans, soldiers said, "Hey, Hoover, um, y'all owe us some money. And we are not so confident that the US government is going to survive the Great Depression because by 1932, some governments in other countries are beginning to collapse because they can't handle this Great Depression. And so it's in the 1930s that you see a revolution in Italy. You see a revolution in Germany. You see revolution ish in Japan. You see a revolution in Spain. And you see revolutions in Mexico, and we're not so certain that the United States government is going to survive this. And so a lot of these World War One veterans say, "Hey, Hoover, I want my money before because I need the money now." Like a lot of these old veterans are unemployed. Like a lot of people in the country are unemployed, and these veterans are like, "Hey, Mr. Hoover, the government owes me money for my World War One service. I need it now." And Hoover said, "Well, that's meant for you to have when you retire." And the veterans are like, "Hey, man, if I don't, I might not survive out of this long enough to retire. And then what about my money? What about my money for my kids? It's all lost. So, hey, Mr. Hoover, I need the money now so that I can feed my kids." And that's the bonus army because Mr. Hoover said, "You're not getting it." And then some people said, "You know what? We're going to come take it." And so a lot of World War One veterans are going to organize together, group up together, and they're going to take trains and march up to DC and camp out in DC and tell President Hoover, "You will give me my money, and we're not leaving until you do." And what is Hoover's response? He sends out the military to basically have a battle in DC, in a battle, like shooting and grenades and stuff. Y'all know about that? That happened. And what happened to them? They went back home. The way a lot of the guys saw it is that their military turned against them. Okay, so number 17. What were the three causes of the Dust Bowl? Over farming, poor soil management. Um, yeah, it says three. I'm gonna give you two. That's enough. Oh, and poor soil management and poor investment in their farms. Yeah, so over farming, poor soil management, and poor investment. Not because they didn't know how to invest; they just didn't have the resource to do so, and how to farm better. So those are your main cause of the Dust Bowl. So whenever it comes time, Mr. Hoover is elected for his first term in 1928, when things were still looking pretty good. The Great Depression began in 1929. That means that man's got 3 more years as president during the Great Depression. Dang. And so his response is, "I'm not really going to do a whole lot." And Hoover's a little bit on the right side here, a little bit, because he makes a statement that if the federal government gets involved in every single issue and gets involved in the lives of every single person, once that happens, then the government, the federal government, is never going to be the same again. When you can't undo that once you do that. Before Herbert Hoover, if someone were to complain about the government's corrupt, they're generally talking about the state government, or they may be talking about the county government, or even the town government. But they're not talking about the federal government because the federal government is way over there and has, before Mr. Hoover, very little input in what happens here. It was a lot of people saw the federal government, state government, county government relationship as the county governs, the state sort of oversees the county, and the federal government is sort of just there to keep the alliance of states going. And so don't get involved. The federal government doesn't get involved in your business. It's way over there. The biggest government you're going to deal with before Mr. Herbert Hoover is president is going to be like the government in your state. And yeah, yeah. And so Herbert Hoover has 3 more years as president, and Still, he gets blamed for the Great Depression by a lot of people. And so when it comes time for Mr. Hoover's reelection, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm not so confident in his ability to get America out of this situation. Um, and it doesn't help that he was running against a guy in 1932 for reelection that was one of the most charismatic. Everybody seems to like the guy. He completely looks like so competent. He makes so confident. He knows exactly what he's doing, whether he does or not. He looks that way. And so you got Herbert Hoover that looks like he's just trying to keep, putting band-aids over big wounds, and he's just trying to patch things up as they go along. And he's running against this guy that says, "Hey, I got a plan. In fact, I got three. I got three plans. I know exactly what I want to do, and you can vote for this guy," says the guy he's running against, that just doesn't seem to know what's happening. Or me, hey, I see it. I've talked with economists. I know what to do. Elect me. I mean, I don't know what to do, he would say, but I know what not to do, and that's what he's doing. I'm gonna try everything. Doesn't help Mr. Hoover's case. And so Mr. Hoover, when he runs for reelection in 32, he's gonna lose big to Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's a cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. And so Hoover does not get reelected, but Franklin Roosevelt does get elected president in 1932. And the very first thing he says is, "Y'all, it's time that we have a new relationship between American citizens and their government. We've got to stop thinking like the federal government's way over here and you're way over here and you don't talk. The only way to get out of this is to set up a new relationship, a new deal between the federal government and the citizens of the country. We've got to have a new deal. The federal government promises to help where it can, and you promise to help where you can, and we'll make this new deal happen because that's the only way we're pulling out of the Great Depression." And that is called the New Deal. When Mr. Roosevelt says, "We're going to try everything to get out of the Great Depression. All you got to do is you try everything." The federal government and the American people have a new relationship. The federal government begins to invest in individual lives. The New Deal, that's what it is. A whole bunch of programs, a whole bunch of loan programs, a whole bunch of job programs, a whole bunch of every place that of the federal government can invest its millions of dollars into the lives of individual people, it does. And that's the New Deal. One of those packages as part of the New Deal is number 19, the FDIC. FDIC stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it is designed to fix the whole banking issue. Basically, when the banks went under, when the Great Depression just started to hit, people that had their money in their local banks lost their money, which is bad. So Roosevelt said, first thing we're going to fix is the banks, and so he's going to institute a corporation called, well, the FDIC, which says if the bank goes under, you individual citizens don't have to worry about your money. Your money is insured. So if your bank goes bankrupt because of another Great Depression, don't worry, the federal government's got you back. We will, if they lose your money, we will reimburse you on that money up to $10,000. So number 20. Oh, and by the way, it still operates. Number 20, what happened in the first 100 days of Mr. Roosevelt's administration? Everything. That man he just invented programs out of his head, whole companies out of his head, hundreds of them, to try to invest back into individual lives, into America. Another one of those is called the PWA. It's called the Public Works Administration. So one of the problems he also saw is that people don't have jobs. So he's going to create at least at least five agencies that are designed to do nothing but just get people jobs. Does a job need done? No. Like the Public Works Administration. Does the town of Benson need a new park? No, but some people in Benson need jobs, so let's create a park in Benson or in Four Oaks. And um, whether the park needs to be built or not, it doesn't really matter. Let's build one because people need jobs. So the federal government will pay them money, will pay workers to build something that doesn't need to be built, not because it needs to be built, but because they need work. So because if they get paid, then they can buy, and if they can buy, then companies are going to make a little bit more money, and if companies make more money, then they can begin to hire people again. You see how the idea was? Okay, so what was the role of the NRA? The NRA is called the National Recovery Act, and the role of that is um, it's mostly responsible for distributing money to industries to help them hire workers, to help them hire people. What did the CCC do for young men? CCC stands for Civilian Conservation Corps. Another one of those things where I'm going to give you a job, not because the thing needs doing, but because you need to have a job. And it is geared towards young unemployed men to help them get paid, and so they can invest back into the economy. Um, and that's just one of several. Now, I need to also point out, just for the sake of having this conversation, the CCC was a good thing for a lot of people, but not everybody was treated equally in the CCC. A lot of white young men got a lot of jobs, and there was a large amount of discrimination in the CCC, and so the CCC didn't really help. But like by design, it was intentional. It was straight out of the federal government to not hire non-white citizens where they could get by with it, and that's where we are there. What was the effect of the second New Deal? So Mr. Roosevelt is going to Yep, that's the last one. Mr. Roosevelt is going to institute two versions of the New Deal. The first New Deal is to stop the bleeding. So fix the banks, fix the loans, get people jobs. Okay, second New Deal. Now let's try to help people. And the second New Deal is when you see things like the Social Security Act to try to put money in the hands of retirees to do those sort of things so that this doesn't really